Thank you very much, Ibrahim, for that background report on latest inflation figures. We already have seated in the studio our guest for today. First is Dr. Ayo Anthony. He's the head prices division, National Bureau of Statistics. Dr. Ayo, you're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Okay. Also in the studio, we have Dr. Emeka Okengo. He's a development economist. Dr. Okengo, good to see you again.
It's always a pleasure to be here. Good to see you, Demola.
Thank you.
Good morning.
We also have with us Dr. Niyi Akinshiju, Chairman, Independent Media and Policy Initiative, who's also a financial investment analyst. Dr. Akinshiju, thank you very much for joining us again.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. And I'm glad that we have a female joining us for this conversation, Professor Mariam Abdu, Professor of Finance. Prof, good to see you, and I'm most delighted to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
All right. Thank you, Professor Abdu from Kaduna Studio. But let's just kickstart our conversation from here. And I will start with Dr. Ayo Anthony, who is the head prices division, National Bureau of Statistics. The latest inflation figures shows a rate of 24.23% in March 2025. Tell us, what are the primary drivers of this increase and how it will impact the nation's, Nigerians' purchasing power?
Okay, thank you. Once again, thank you for having me. Nigeria Bureau of Statistics carried out rebasing of the Consumer Price Index, and the first inflation figure after the rebasing was announced in January. The second was in February. The first 2 months, we have a decline in inflation rate. Mind you, the purpose of rebasing is not to reduce inflation figure. Because I read from some newspaper that Nigeria inflation deferred rebasing. The purpose of rebasing is to compute current inflationary pressure of the economy. It's not meant to reduce inflation figure. That's number one point I want Nigerians and our listeners to know. Now, the March inflation figure is expected. Inflation shows the inflationary pressure in an economy. 24.23% inflation compared to 23.18% in February. It's about 1.5% increase. It's expected. The data for this March inflation was collected during the festive period, Salah. You know, in Nigeria, anytime there is festive period, profiteering is there for our sellers. Apart from that, there will be increase in aggregate demand. Number two, in February, March, the price of PMS jack up due to the dollar-naira issue between federal government and Dangote. That made PMS price 800 to about 900 is a factor. Number two, and number three. If you look at our services today, on the average, there is increase in price of services. When I say service, non-tangible goods, especially since our telecommunication company increased their tariff.
And house rent.
Thank you.
Is it one of them?
Definitely, it's part of. If you look at if you look at our sectorial classification of the pushers of inflation, housing, restaurant, accommodation is a factor. It's number 3 there. It's number 3. So these are some of the factors. Another factor I can lay my hand upon is the exchange rates. You know, if you go to our current basket, food constitutes almost 40% of the weight. And anything that happened to this division, when I say division, food and non-alcoholic beverage, which constitute 40% of aggregate household expenditure, which you call weight, is like a multiplier. whatever happens to any product in this class has a greater impact on the headline inflation. And among the products in this class, we have standardized products. When I say standardized products, non-farm produce product or processed products like semovita, Indomie, Bonvita. All these things are of high demand during this period. So in the nutshell, these are some of the factors responsible for the upturn in inflation figure in this month of March.
Okay.
Honestly, I don't even know what to ask again. I'm just wondering, because most of the things that you have talked about that are pushing, the inflation, are something, food items, everyday need in the home. And I'm surprised you even mentioned ginger, because ginger is out of reach now. You even talk about items like what we call the jabu gari, gari in the market now but the link to the festival period is what I don't understand, because these are prices that have been high even before the festivities. They had, setting. And is it going to, are we likely to see a reduction? Maybe, again, we are approaching Easter. Is it going to be more in April, when you release the April figure?
That is this month.
Yes, this month, at the end of this month. I mean, I don't understand.
Thank you for your question. Sorry, I'm laughing because I'm also in Nigeria as well. Yes. We are passing through the same thing.
You may not feel it as much as I do, because I go to market almost every day.
It's okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. You see, some of the items you mentioned now, they are necessity. And necessities, any item categorized as necessity, they are highly price inelastic. When I say price inelastic, whatever the price of those items are, people will do what? We buy. So as they buy it, definitely we are pushing the demand above what? Supply. They keep on increasing. Then the festive period. See, inflation is persistent increase in general price level. If you look at the report that was read some minutes ago, the reporter said the rate at which prices of goods and services increase in March is higher than February. That does not mean February the prices of those goods are not on high side. It's just the only thing that in March higher. Because you said those items are already high before. It's just that in March, due to the factors I mentioned now, the rate at which those prices were moving up became higher than February. And one thing I want Nigerians to know about price is this. Price is highly volatile. Little thing that happen to the factors of demand and supply will affect what? Price. Unlike output. Output can be affected by lag. If you have inventory of goods and services now, before it finishes, it takes time. But anything that happens to price, and apart from that, the environment you find ourselves in this world, where prices are not regulated, when you leave the buyer and seller to determine the price at which they sell their product, profiteering, profit maximization, they can expect. We are in Nigeria. Anytime there is festive period, Christmas period, what make price will go up?
Let me ask you, because
as you said now,
yes.
Easter is on the way now.
Yes.
There will be increase in price of chicken. That is true. There will be increase in price of meat, because people will likely buy more of this item than the supply. And the seller as well will want to get money to meet his or her need as well. Something of 1,000, they may say 1,002.
But your state by state analysis, I saw some states like Bayelsa, for instance, recorded low, price increase. States like Nasarawa didn't even record any price increase. Why you have Kaduna or so why do we have that?
Thank you for your question. I'm happy for this question. Many people have asked this question from me since yesterday, and I've been answering the question. In computing consumer price index, from which we get inflation rates, it's not just price changes alone we looked at. When I say price change, price relativity, that's what we call weight. And weight varies across states. When they say weight, consumption pattern. In 2023, National Bureau of Statistics conducted household expenditure. When I say household expenditure, I have 1,000 naira. What I use that 1,000 naira to buy is different from what somebody in Kano will use that 1,000 naira to buy. That's what we call relative expenditure. So relative expenditure in Kano is different from Bayelsa. So after we have gotten the price change will be multiplied by the relative expenditure, which is not homogeneous across all states in Nigeria. It is heterogeneous. That is why you see something like that. That's why empirically, if you go to Sokoto, the price of Gari will not be the same thing in Bayelsa. That's a factor. Not only that, the expenditure pattern in these two states are not what? The same. So these are the two major variables we consider when we are computing inflation every month. Not just price change. That one is a factor. What of the multiplier, which you call household expenditure? Weight.
Okay, Dr. Anthony, thank you so much for giving us the background there. Let's come to Dr. Emeka Okengu. Let's look at the implication of these inflation rates on the economy generally, because, I mean, a lot of people are groaning right now, and the purchasing power seems to be, reducing. So what is the implication of this on economic growth, employment, and even on poverty?
Well, you're missing something. Citizen sanity and mental health. I think that's also very critical. I want to stay with the 40%, okay, which is the main weight. And this is where you get this citizen sanity and mental health. And this is where we also land Claire's concerns. That you as a mom will go to the market, somebody looks at you, picks up 2 pieces of ginger and says, Madam, 500, and then looks away. And what you have in your pocket, for that day, for that month, is 4,000 or 5,000 or even 10,000. So let me also now fixate this to what the issues are. We can talk about this front end. Let's look at the back end. And the back end, Demola, is productivity. If you had volumes, if you had farms that were producing ginger, both at the organic, both at the pedestrian, both at the small scale, both at the commercial scale, there is no way you would have ginger selling at 2 for 500, mangoes 2 for this. So I think the basic factor that we're trying to not get is that we are at that slippery slope where we are losing our capacity and ability as a nation to be able to produce what we eat. That's one part of it. And then it is worsened by the fact that as a nation, we are also at this point where we can no longer be able to import even what we eat. There are 2 factors here. Factor number 1 is the global disruptions, okay, that are there. All right, the global factors. Factor number 2 is the cost of your currency against where you are importing from. So it's important in trying to put this conversation into perspective. Okay, and then we have talked about these rural and local economies. And I'm very keen on it. Do we have one rural economy for Nigeria? Would it be fair to classify the Abuja rural economy with the rural economy of Sokoto? And this is when our disposable capital comes in. Claire, you also raised an issue. Is housing part of this? If your house rent cannot be captured under 15%, I think that's the allocation now for housing development of your wage, then you are in trouble. Okay, because what if you want to go and borrow against mortgage? You don't get more than 15% of your total income. Now, if you have an income where 15% of your total income on an annual basis cannot pay for a house in Karimo as a deputy director, okay, can't pay for 1 year, and then you're supposed to be borrowing against that to be able to build your house and then pay over a 10-year period, you are now having this second problem. So for me, you're talking about the impact, and I'm trying to make it as open as we can. And who do we now ask what has happened here? It might not just be the federal government, because what Dr. Oju has done is to lay the statistics, lay the situations bare to you. Who are the culprits here? First and foremost, the first thing I would ask is, where is that food production implementation plan for our country? What volume of nutrition do we need to produce as a nation to be self-sufficient? We're talking about 40%. We're talking about rising prices. It's for those who have the money. Are we not talking about malnutrition? Has that been taken into consideration? Because from the statistics that are releasing, it simply means that a lot of people are also getting anemic and malnourished. This is a basic factor. Because if you look at somebody's disposable capital against, what he needs to buy, and against the prices he needs to buy it, and he's not able, he can't buy it, he can't afford it, that person is getting malnourished. There are situations now, even where I come from, where you come from, Claire, where they are showing pictures of children who have gotten very, very malnourished. It's in a lot of platforms. And this is national. So we're just looking at it from the statistical, point of view. Like you asked me now, what is the human impact on our economy? And that's why I said to you, it's important to include, the mental health, issues and the frustration that this can also occasion. Now, this is one part of it. You drive a Mercedes, you buy fuel for 20,000, which gives you about 18 liters or thereabout. You live in Karasana or Gwarimpa or Nyanya or wherever. You drive into this place. By the time you go home and come out the next morning, if you have an indicator, it begins to show yellow. The next 2 days, you can't drive out. Now, where do you capture that cost? Where is it captured in our inflationary, computations? So I think what we need to do is to begin to rethink this thing. We need to rethink it and rethink it very deeply and very fast, because it's no longer about talk. I think we have gone past talk. We have a situation in our hands, and as a country, I think it's important that we take what the MBS has done very seriously. I commend them for this job. I commend them for being even brave to be able to put it the way it is. And I rest on this, because I told Dr. Oju, if we are not funding MBS to do the proper things, we might not even be able to get the real figures, because a lot of what we have now are not generated from real-time studies.
We will ask you to tell us the real things that NBS should be doing. If they have the weight.
As a Nigerian, as a consultant.
If they have the weight to do that, because that's an issue that we have raised, and it's very critical to the issues that we're discussing. Dr. Akinshiju, several things have come up, from Dr. Kengu. He talked about our capacity to produce what we eat, and indeed, as a mother, as a housewife, I go to the market today, the prices of potatoes, Irish potatoes, have refused to come down. The prices of even the sweet potatoes is going up. You discover that fresh pepper, the one we know as atarudo, remains very, very high. Plantain, you can't even touch it. And these are, daily needs. Daily needs. If demand is knocking off supply and increasing prices, it means it speaks to our capacity to produce, as Dr. Kengu has said. Do we lack that capacity to produce what we eat now?
Well, historically, I think we've had issues with enough food production. It's not a recent phenomenon, as it were.
But we're making progress in some areas at the time.
Yeah, well, I know that over the past so many months, a major headache had been food inflation, the food inflation rate. So much that we nearly celebrated, sometimes in February, when we're getting reports of reduction in food prices, And well, there's a linkage. If in February, the reports that were coming in by independent media reports, media survey, that prices of foods across Nigeria were coming down. And of course, we couldn't stop, of course, religious activities. It was not just the Salah. You had the two main religions, commencing their fasting during that period. And we also know historically in Nigeria that once it is fasting time, when you expect people to eat less, that is when the price of food go up. And then you start wondering what exactly are the factors behind this. I think a major challenge for Nigeria is that we have unannounced, or rather unpronounced challenges from cartels, product cartels across markets. And I think there's a need to start looking at that. Sometimes, of course, we all agree that we have structural challenges where it comes to food baskets areas, either in terms of the challenges of moving agricultural products from the farm gates, to the city gates, as it were, bad roads, increased cost of transportation, etc., etc. But the truth also is that in the market, you also have cartels that actually determine prices before they go into the space. So it is not an actual case of market forces. Normally, it's the demand and supply that should determine, what the price is. But where you have human elements intervening at that level, it becomes unusual. And one would think the relevant government agency should review this and see how it can be engaged. Of course, we, across the world, especially in the developed world, we see what what American governments, the European government have been doing with antitrust.
When you talk of human
interventions,
yes, can you be explicit?
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, for instance, in the market, where you have Pepper Sellers Association, Yam Sellers Association, Ram Sellers Association, and all that. For every supply that gets into that market, they also do a projection of the relationship between supply and demand, and determine what best price they want to sell, and of course direct their members to sell. And that is why you get into a market that is supposed to be a group of heterogeneous sellers who have not seen themselves in the morning. But from one stall to the other, you realize that the prices are in the same range. And that is not supposed to be so. So when you have that kind of intervention, you have a third-party intervention determining, price, and that's a distortion in the economy. That is one. Then two, yes, we've been talking about security challenges that had to do with food supply, and that's, I don't think we have done so. I don't think that is being addressed effectively, though there have been an improvement, over time. But the important thing again is storage. You cannot produce so much, and you are not storing them appropriately. So we can be rated as the largest producer of cassava in the world. Nigeria can be rated as largest or second largest producer of yam in the world. Recently, we have been rated as the largest producer of rice in Africa. And then Nigerians are also complaining, what exactly happened to those production, So could it be about that we are producing but we are not conserving? Are we conserving but we are not processing? There are so many issues that need to be addressed in that value chain. So for me, I think the important thing is to start understanding what government is doing. I also understand and appreciate what government is doing. But there should be a relationship, between government and people in the market, especially where it comes to food. Because this food thing, if you look at the NBS figures, food and non-alcoholic beverage, particularly, were the two main factors that are driving this price movement in March. We are talking about 9.2 percentage points in the index. Compared to the next one, I think accommodation or something, which is about 2%. So we are talking about 7 percentage point difference. So it's a major headache. But however, I think what the government is doing, from my own reading, because I like to look at the challenges and see if there are movement at all on the part of government that is responsible for policy deployment. And I feel, well, if government had budgeted so much, about 1.5 trillion, for the recapitalization of the Bank of Agriculture, it does understand that the government, it does mean that the government understands or appreciates the challenges, and that there's a need, of course, to recapitalize the Bank of Agriculture in a way that it will be able to disburse funds, to farmers. And I hope it will not be the same situation we had with the anchor borrowers program. Then all of a sudden, I've seen a lot of activities around the river basin, ecosystem. Unlike before, when you don't even know who is who in the river basin. And now the president has said, okay, he's declaring a state of emergency. When I saw that, I said, well, that is very good. If the president decides to create a state of emergency, on food and food production, it is also an understanding and appreciation of the challenges, within the environment by the government. So, but how are these being communicated? How are stakeholders, in that value chain, being consulted and, of course, carried along in the implementation of this vision, as it were? Recently, we have also heard about the special agricultural processing zone, SUPA, that had been on the drawing table for more than 14 years. I also hope that finally this will take off, because everybody who has been somebody has talked about the challenges of processing into secondary products, So the SAPZ, as it were, being funded by the FDB and other bodies, if we are able to realize, would it, of course, create some sort of a softening of these challenges? The long and short of my position is that, in truth, food is a major problem. But more than that, the issues with the third-party intervention in determining price should also be addressed.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Akinshiju, for your perspective there. Let's bring in Professor Abdul from our Kaduna studio. I know that you have been listening to the conversation here in the studio, and a lot of issues have been raised concerning these inflation rates, and especially as it affects, the common man, the implication of this on the economy, and also on the purchasing power of the average Nigerian. Let's have your perspective on this.
Thank you so very much. We have seen the statistics from the Bureau of Statistics. Inflation of 24% is quite high. It's double digit, and it's very high for a nation. Now, breaking it down further, if you look at what NBS is saying, if you look at the urban and the rural rates of inflation, you find urban as high as 26%, rural maybe 20%, 24%. Now, honestly, this is it's not a good picture for the country. Several factors have actually caused the inflationary pressure, especially in Kaduna. Kaduna has the highest of 33% when you look at the state's analysis. Several factors are responsible for this, such as the insurgency. There's a disconnect between the farmers, and then logistics of transporting these goods to where it's supposed to be. Then we look at petroleum issues. The high fuel prices has actually escalated the issue of inflation. Now, inflation is taking a terrible toll on the Nigerian populace. Some people eat twice a day, some even one, some half, from the traditional 3 times that we used to eat. So inflation is really a menace to us in our country, and we should devise means in how to solve the issue. The issue of foreign exchange, for instance, that too has had a very negative effect on inflation figures. Interest rates charged by the central bank, which I personally feel is on the high side, because if you have to look at the production process, we should be able to look at interest. I know CBN is trying to fight monetary policy, but there are side effects of high inflationary interest rate pressures. And then if you look at the issue of seasonal activities, some of the staple foods we take in Nigeria are seasonal in nature. And sometimes there tends to be an opposite direction. Maybe the price of tomatoes will be high, and then the price of onions will be low. It's a seasonal activity. So we should devise a means where we can cushion this debt, this gap, per se. When the price of tomatoes are high, that means it's out of season. So by the time we have a flamboyant season, we should have a situation where we can store some of these tomatoes and then push it into the market when the price is when it's becoming scarce. So inflation has had and is still having an effect on the populace. Our purchasing power is virtually gone. It's so demoralizing. We'll soon see manufacturing companies being faced with excess stocks because of the lack of patronage in some of their products. So I think we should think seriously in how we can solve this issue of inflation, which is actually a menace to our country.
Just like to, maybe you can provide us with more insights, what this implies for our GDP in real terms.
Gross domestic product, honestly, with high inflation, it is going to affect GDP. Because when people don't purchase goods, we're going to see a situation where manufacturing sector is going to have a reduction in its production process. A lot of companies are having that problem. That's why we're seeing a reduction in a lot of food goods that are coming out of industry. So like I said, if we're going to look at our GDP, we have to look at interest rates. It's very, very difficult for manufacturing companies to operate on the double-digit interest rates that we're facing now. We have one of the highest interest rates in the world. So it's very, very important. I know CBN is trying to fight monetary policy, but they should look at other factors that actually cause inflationary pressures. It's not necessarily interest rate. And I know the president wants us to. We're trying to actually increase the GDP. That was the hope of this administration, that the gross domestic product will actually increase from what we have been facing previously. But we're prayerful, and we hope that the economy will do much better.
All right. Thank you very much, Prof, for that contribution. And I'm just a bit worried because when Dr. Ayo, said it's expected, I mean, if you compare the month-on-month, analysis, February, and now that it's expected, and I know that at the end of this month you will come again, it's expected. So are we really growing?
Okay. But
are we moving forward? I know we have. Yes. Sorry, Demola. Let's. Yes, I'll take this.
Two of this.
Yes, please go ahead. Yes.
Now, when I say expected, as an economist, your inflation figure should speak to what is happening in your environment. And that's what I call historical analysis. Just as Dr. Niyi said, in Nigeria, anytime we are doing any festivity and thereabout, that's on that premise, that's what I use the word expected. Historically, anytime we are having festival in Nigeria, prices of goods and services do go up. That's why I choose that word expected. Not that I know what inflation in April will be now. No. Our enumerators are in the feed. Data collection started 2 weeks ago.
But are we growing?
When I say growth, growth is all about output, GDP. Our output level is growing. If you look at the GDP we reported last quarter, it's about 3-point-something% increase. The output is growing. You see, when you talk of growth, growth is the percentage change in output in this period compared to a base period. The only thing is that at what rate are we growing? That's the question. Are we growing at the rates that suit our potential? The answer is no. But we are growing. Another problem is our output level growing the same way our population is growing? The answer is what? No. the population is growing faster than the output. Mean that per capita is what? Coming down.
So that's what the challenge is.
That's the problem.
Okay, and I think we have some
Yes, we've received
reactions
some
from the
SMS messages.
Yes.
This is from Daniel. Daniel says, let's forget about rise in dollar. In Nigeria, there should be a market board site where buyers and sellers could get prices of each items before going to the market to purchase their goods. Of course, market board, that's what Daniel is suggesting. And this is from Wisdom. Wisdom is a student. Said, please, how are we to enhance stable inflation rate in this our dear country, Nigeria? Or maybe how do we stabilize the inflation rate, should be what he's trying to find out. Then Kabiru says the government should kick out all so-called humanitarian organizations from all conflict regions. Maybe Kabiru is trying to find a nexus between the activities of these NGOs and, maybe, yes. Hamza says, the basic truth is that there is no holistic and sincere synergy between the security outfits and the judiciary?
No, I think that they got it right. Okay,
Yes,
that's outside the scope. They're just talking about what we discussed yesterday.
Yesterday. Yeah.
Okay, but here we have the respondents, no name actually, this is just a good morning Nigerians. I think what we need is a strong price regulatory body. Sometimes this inflation is in prices are made by marketers. Okay, Mejama from Kano. And then the other one, it's no name. Good morning. Thank you for this program. The speakers are speaking very well. Oh, so they're commending your contribution. So let's come back to Dr. Okengu. I mean, we're looking at this issue very seriously, and I'm just thinking because all these things boils down on policymakers, and so what balance? How can policymakers balance the need to control inflation and also with the need to promote economic growth? Is there a way that they can strike a balance?
Yes, the first balance will be support. It's one thing for you to have a policy pronouncement. It's another thing for you to have support programs. Let me take, for instance, the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security. It captures two elements, food security and agriculture. So the agriculture will be the science of it. The food security will be the business of it. Now, if you declare a state of emergency in a sector like agriculture, I thought that what would happen is that you now need to support, that institution, that ministry, to begin to now ramp up what it needs to do. Remembering that it is not an implementing agency, or it shouldn't be. It should be a regulator or a facilitator. Yeah. In doing so, I can tell you for sure that the present leadership of the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security have done tremendously well in trying to do what is needful. However, that is at the level of policy. Now let's drill down. There's a pronouncement to say 500,000 hectares of land should be under cultivation. Okay? And 500 hectares of land being under cultivation means three things. One, there has to be mapping of that land to identify it. Two, there has to be clearing of that land to be able to get it ready for cultivation. Three, there has to be, programs to now start cultivating. Four, there has to be the human element to manage that cultivation. Five, there has to be, a harvesting, post-harvest, pre-harvest program that now secures that production. Okay. And it has to be result-oriented. Now, this is now where you begin to now support with very clear outputs. And in that room will be everybody who is supposed to be there. You see, yes, the guy who talked about insecurity and judges might also be linked to this. I was listening to an interview, with the Zamfara state government, and he said that they had caught some people And then one of them had said, I'm trying to paraphrase now, we're going to be back soon. And by the time he had turned his eyes, the guys were back again. So this is now where the justice system, ties into insecurity. Because it's important that in doing crime, you must be able to do time, and justice must be swift. Otherwise, if you're struggling, it's like, I'll tell a story. Just give me a minute. When we were in the university, some guy came into our room, stole our musical stats. We beat him black and blue. And the guy says, you guys have beaten me, oh. Let's end this matter. And one of my roommates said, oh, let's take him to the police station. Then we ended up being the ones to be bailed. No, this is the true story. Because by the time we got there, I don't know what conversation he had, with the people. And they said, okay, all of you come and start writing your statements. How did you know it was him? Who told you to beat him? This, that. And our parents now started intervening. Now, so if you don't have a justice system that is swift, and then be able to rein in people, because Kaduna, one of the reasons that they gave in Kaduna was insecurity. Okay, if you had insecurity reined in, Kaduna has enough land. I can tell you that if you're traveling from Abuja to Kaduna, you have a minimum of 200 kilometers of flat land on both sides of the road. Imagine if you had that amount of land in cultivation. And then you have a very major, water program on that stretch. Yet you do not see, you just see pockets of maybe farms here and there and hamlets. So if you're looking for solutions, the first solution we need to do is not to begin to blame game. It is for us to begin to support. And in this case, I'll be saying, yes, it's a good thing for us to declare state of emergency, but we are not declaring state of emergency to indict the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security. We are actually declaring that state of emergency for them to be supported. Because the next thing you're going to be hearing now is, oh, change the minister, oh, change the PAMSEC, oh, change the leadership, oh, change. That's not what it is. If we empower those, like I'm coming to MBS now. Yes, MBS says well, we have enumerators in the field taking enumeration. All right. These enumerators you have, would it have been safer if you had a relationship with the states you're enumerating? So instead of putting people more at risk, now with the high cost of fuel, what distance can they cover? If you had one enumerator, if you had one staff working with the Kaduna State Bureau of Statistics, working with the Kaduna State Planning Commission, and you had another staff working with the local governments of Kaduna. Now you have MBF staff you have engaged within that locality who understand the locality, okay, who can interface and speak the language. Now, instead of now having people travel all the way from Abuja, the risk of kidnap is there, the risk of accidents are there, the risk of not even be able to complete, the assignments.
So okay, you just embed them within the existing institutions.
Yes, and I'll tell you what will now happen. Whatever statistics that they generate, okay, now has the input of MBS at the local government level. You're talking about building institutional, support now. Because, trust me, except Dr. Oju will be in that bus. If you give me ₦1 million to go and do enumeration, there are villages I won't enter into. I will call you on the phone and say, oh God, beautiful things are happening here.
So what you're saying is we embed, NBS should embed their staff within the existing institutions at those state level.
And at the local government level. More
level.
Important at the local government level. Because if you're talking about enumeration, yes, you're talking about scoping. I am not a very big fan of scoping studies when you want to start taking major decisions. It could help you as some investment advisory, but it shouldn't be the basis of your taking an investment decision. It has to be drilled a little bit further. But what is done is a guide, is an eye-opener. So instead of states now coming to now say, oh, I don't believe you, which is what has always happened each time they release their results. What if we have people now, okay, who are from the MBS? And this would involve some costing, okay, some spread. So MBS can now tell you we are everywhere we should be, at least for now. That would, in a lot of ways, help what it is we're doing.
Okay. I'm just, yes. Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Because Nigerians are hearing us.
Yes.
MBS has offices across all the 36 states of the Federation. That's number one. Number two, our monthly price data collection is done by our staff in the states. We don't send staff from Abuja to states. Not only that, we have what we call market outlets. In prices data collection, you are not expected to be collecting prices randomly. There should be a designated outlet you visit every month, because we know our market structure in Nigeria.
Okay.
If I come to you today, how much is this thing? We know you will tell me, instead of 1,000, you say 1,002. Am I right? Mm-hmm. But if you know that I am an official of government, I'm not coming to buy, and there's a relationship, what's the price of this thing today? You will give me the actual price. That's why in pricing statistic, price data collection is not done randomly. Consistency in where you get your prices is the principle. So that's one thing I want to correct from what Doctor said. We don't send enumerator from head office to state. Now, that's what we call consultative forum.
What about that local?
That's what I'm going to. That's what we call consultative forum. MBS at the states has relationship with local governments. For example, now anytime I want to do a major survey, we let the local government give us enumerators because of language issue. Familiarization with the environment is a factor if you want to get anything from that environment. So there is a lot of relationship between MBS and states and local government. The only thing is that we may not have staff in local governments, but we have staff across all the state, and our staff are living across most of the local government that make up a state. That's my intervention in what he said. Thank you.
Let's look at, again, this is an area that I know would interest a lot of my colleagues, even those of us here in the studio, because it talks about accommodation or rental. And I'm just wondering, what is driving, the cost of accommodation high, such that it's even impacting, an inflation.
The cost of construction is going very up. It's going up. Cost of construction itself is high. And, we have this culture of anticipated returns in the whole of the Nigerian scenario. If you stock a product, you are always anticipating the cost of restocking, So the same person that had built a house,
house owners are not restocking. They're not even renovating.
The same person that had built a house 20 years ago would be pricing the house at the anticipated or projected, cost of that house in the next 10 years. It's unfortunate. But you see, because we have a rental culture that speaks mainly to rents per term, instead of offsetting, from the total cost, possible cost of the property. So, for instance, rent to home, those who do the cultures that have rent to home would, of course, emphasize for every payment a reduction in the eventual cost of acquisition. But in the Nigerian case, you will be paying, the property is appreciating, and when you are going to renew, the owner of the property would renew by increasing costs at the rate of appreciation of the property. So it's a dilemma, in truth. And I think there's also a need for a government intervention in this, because the truth of the matter is house owners are not supposed to gain from the two sides. It's either you gain from your rent, and of course you make sure eventually that the property reverts to the person that had paid the rent over time. But again, the problem is what extent that government be active over time in the provision of housing. And if we are saying again in terms of the needs of the accommodation needs of Nigeria beyond the property needs, and we are talking about the housing gaps, we don't have exact figures, but we keep talking of between 16 million, 17 million, some 30 million gaps. And it does talks to the fact that supply has been very, very less than demand. So, especially in Abuja now that has become the next urban ghetto. as it were, because every Nigerian from everywhere, like the case of Lagos, are now heading, into Abuja, and that will of course put pressure on housing. You won't have this scenario or this situation in in rural areas, because again, people are moving from there, and the cost of accommodation is not as high, as in urban centers. So this very morning, I was asking an architect friend of mine that if someone was interested in building a bungalow, how much would it cost? I said, with land? I said, no, with no land, just the cost of bungalow. He says 25 million naira minimum. That's 3-bedroom. I was like, because it's a survey I do every year to see the reflection of costs of construction. 5 years ago, this was 5 million. This time, 5 years ago, I did the same survey to construct a 3-bedroom bungalow. 5 years ago would cost you 5 million. It's 25 million now. It will naturally reflect on rent. If it's not rent, if you are selling, it will also reflect on the pricing.
It's just that I don't find the link where people who live in Nyanya, Maraba, Karu, Kurudu districts, in the area, I call those areas districts, permit me, would be asking for 1 point for, a 2-bedroom. I mean,
because
they are not new structures.
Those people that are moving into those districts used to stay in the central district. Pricing,
push them
to that side.
Okay, Dr.
And I
Akishiju.
have more people.
All right. So we just have to pause here because the director is calling for a break. When we come back, we'll continue with the conversation. Stay with us. Oh, you're welcome back. You're still on to Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. We are still on, the topic is still the inflation rates. And we have our guest seated in the studio. And before we went on break, we were discussing with Dr. Akishiju, who will likely conclude his thought. But then we have some reactions from some of our viewers, and we'd like to quickly take one or two of them. Olakule says, inflation pressure is straining household budget and increasing cost of living for many Nigerians. Then Sule from Jigawa said, good morning. Sincerely speaking, we have all the required rules to beat inflation. Then from Musa Jos, is that people in production are finding it difficult to cope. And for food to come down, talk about transportation security from Tochuku. And Yusuf Sharif from Maiduguri says, buying foodstuff in the name of palliative is distorting the supply flow. Then Alaji Garko from from Abuja said, good morning all. It is high time federal government put in place mechanism to assist farmers to go into mechanized farming.
All right, all those, of course, I know majority of them are probably farmers.
Yeah.
Okay, let me start from the rear here. Dr. Gora says, in terms of food inflation, we are not getting it right. There's need to bring ways to get prices of food down. And I know that one of the viewer, I think Daniel, suggested setting up market boards or consumer market boards. We'll get our guests to speak to that issue presently. Now, good morning all. Something should be done to curb high cost of inflation prices of food and accommodation. This is David from River State. David says something should be done to bring down the cost of inflation or the rising cost of food and accommodation. And Gilbert Alabi Diche says, inflation will persist or worsen as long as the Naira exchange rate remains high or volatile. Again, Gilbert says the situation will continue or worsens as long as the Naira exchange rate remains volatile. We also have David suggesting something to be done to the prices of food and accommodation, and Gora says something should be done. Let's look at the suggestion of Daniel for re-establishing. I say re-establishing because we had something, of that nature in the past, especially during the period of the groundnut pyramid. I mean, we all know the consumer price fixing boards and all that. So how do I go? Nii, let's start for you because we stopped you earlier on.
All right. Once you have a marketing board, it means you are alienating the forces of demand and supply. It means that you have a body that buys when produce, are fresh and high in supply and presumably cheap. Then to, of course, intervene in the market when the supply is reduced, declined, and of course at a rate that is supposed to be relatively cheap. So you have like three mechanisms there that you need to determine. The mechanism of when to buy off the market. That's the market's board. When to go procure, when to store, where to store, because storage itself is a major challenge in today's value chain, agricultural value chain that we're talking about. So you're also now saying that the marketing boards would also have to start, procurement in terms of establishing storage facilities and all that. So they are no longer just about projections. They are now active operators in that value chain. Then again, what will determine when to intervene? When they also intervene, what will determine the appropriate price to intervene? Then the fourth, what exactly will be the human elements, in these interventions, in this value chain? So, and perhaps the most important element is that human element. Is there a possibility of that process being corrupted? Mm-hmm. So for me, I think the important thing is to find a way of creating a more amenable environment, where demand and supply thrives.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Akinshiju, to find a way to a more amenable environment where supply and demand thrives. Let's go to our Kaduna studio where we still have Prof. Abdul. Prof, I know that you heard some of the respondents and some of their comments, which I also want you to also respond to, especially what do you think government can do actually to support the vulnerable in the society, such as low-income household, because I know that the women, just like Dr. Okengu said, are feeling this issue, the pain more because of the challenges they have at home. So what do you think government should do to support the vulnerable population, such as low-income households who are really seriously affected by this inflation?
Government has tried so much. We have seen a lot of programs that have come on board to support the less privileged in our societies. We have philanthropic organizations too that are doing their best. But the most important thing is that when you're looking at poverty issues, the underlying issue is we have to look at issues of employment, generation of productivity. We have a large population in Nigeria. As far as I'm concerned, it's supposed to be an asset to us. They should be gainfully employed. Now, giving palliatives or giving monies doesn't really solve the problem. But there should be, that is why entrepreneurship is coming up. We encourage people to engage in one trade or the other. So it's very important that government looks at this issue, look at the production process. I think industry is very key for Nigeria. Government should really look at industry. The operating environment should be conducive so that they can be able to afford and employ these youths or the less privileged in society. But the issue of giving money, and it doesn't solve the problem. They should be gainfully employed. They should find a source of income. And that's my personal view. Thank you.
I like you, Prof. I'd like you to speak again further to the issue of setting up of marketing board to address the issue of, price volatility. Yes, that I think David from River State talked about. We know the other implication, like Niyi said, could be maybe sending a wrong signal to investors and all that. But, as a tool to manage price volatility crisis, is it advisable? Is it an advisable solution?
When you're talking about price volatility, well, forget about one thing, which is the middlemen. The middlemen are the players, and they're very key in this particular situation because they fix the price. When you go to the market, you find kind of a uniformity in price structure, and the middlemen play a very big role. When we're talking about marketing boards, maybe we're looking at exports. Nigeria is actually a mixed economy in the sense that the pricing of goods and services are determined by the supply and demand, and then sometimes government intervention. But marketing boards, if you start talking about marketing boards for now, we're going to look at maybe exports. But we're looking at a very serious measure now, which is actually our economy. And then the middlemen play a very, very important role. I think the middlemen should be addressed more than the issue of marketing boards.
And how do we address the issue of the middlemen?
Very, very serious. You see, the middlemen set the prices because the prices comes from the grassroots or from the rural areas or from the farmland, and then they come to the market and they decide within themselves how much they're going to start selling these products. That's why you find uniform pricing in markets. We can have a dialogue one-on-one with them, convince them to reduce their prices. It's very, very key. And then the most important thing, too, is the issue of petrol. Fuel increase. This is the number one factor that has caused the spreading effect of inflation all over the nation. So these two are key. Identify the middlemen, speak with them one-on-one, and then see how we can solve the issue.
Thank you, Prof.
Dialogue.
Identify the middlemen and dialogue with them. Is it possible? How would you be? The association, but probably call the association. Okay, Dr. Okengo, let me, because somebody from Engineer Rim from Taraba says, if we must get it right, we need silos to manage grains during harvest to reduce post-harvest losses and tackle food inflation. We talked about the problem of storage challenge that we have in this.
We don't have a storage challenge, unfortunately and annoyingly, because we've increased our 400,000 that we had before to some figure now. All our silos are empty, or most of them are empty. I think what we have as a problem is synergy, being able to build that volume that can begin to create your values. And let me take your question, Claire. It's a very simple thing to do. If you do what is called prosperity shared or shared prosperity, you break it so that you now begin to allocate very clear roles to all the players. And the players, number one in this steed, will be your research centers. I had said to you here that I have 6 volumes of research outputs, each volume containing about 5,000, patented outputs of projects conducted by the Agricultural Research Council of Nigeria. 6 volumes. Now, if you are able to now get your research institutes at your back end, and when you were talking about the marketing boards, let me also remind you that the first thing they did was to set up research institutes. That's when you had the Tobacco Research Institute, this Research Institute, that. So for everything, the PAM, NIHO or NIFO, in those days, if you went there and took photographs, you could post it to anybody and say you were in the US. It was a place that ran as an international institute. Now, the second will be, of course, your farmers and the people who own the land. You need to map the land like I told you. If we are talking about 500,000, hectares of land, for instance, you will need to know, first and foremost, suitability, availability, and then what can now support that land to get into production. Again, let me also say this to you. There is no country in the world that has conquered food security that is not subsidizing food production.
Okay.
Name one. None. And I'm not talking about low subsidy. So subsidy is a very, very major component of these things. And when you now subsidize, what you now do is that you create your national budget and national output. Statistically and mathematically, as a country, we must be able to define how many tubers of yam are going to be coming out of this our agricultural production system. A program that the First Lady launched that I think should have been promoted very aggressively. Very aggressively. Okay?
Every garden.
Me and you, oh, no, maybe not me and you, maybe me and Nia. When we were growing up, our mother would send our sisters with a plate to go and say, go and fetch me pepper. I and Nia's mother. All of us will run into the bush, and that bush is my mother's garden to go and get pepper for my mom. Now, every woman had it. Almost every woman had it. Until then, I started moving into the cities and then started thinking that, okay, fine, we have left this rural thing now. Now, it's not a city thing. For a country that has 20% rural inflation is trouble. Big trouble. Because you have over 70% of your citizens living where the inflation is 20%, no money, no disposable capital, no income, no industry, no jobs, and inflation is 20%, and you're taking this lightly? So if you had the First Lady's project, and every woman in Abuja says, okay, I'm friends of the First Lady, and it becomes a Facebook, with you even promoting it.
Every garden.
Mother of the nation, I'm standing by my garden. Thank you for your encouragement. Let us see 10 million women in Abuja who are able to show the First Lady, what they've been able to do with that program. And every day you keep, shouting, help us. Government should intervene. Government has intervened. What the First Lady has done is an intervention. You're talking about solutions now. And in these solutions, you can actually begin to now grow your budget. You now begin to get women who are earning. From that small paper, she earns something else. From this, she does this. From that, she does this. So we can solve our problems, but we need to sit down and develop a framework that can be interrogated. MBS is doing well, yes. They have done well, yes. But that synergy needs to be, more seen than spoken. Because if you had, like Dr. Oju was saying, these people involved, I don't see why the states are pushing back. Because what you just simply say is, but you are part of this data collection. So if they are part of the data collection, why are they pushing back? Now, if they were, then we should be able to now include them before these releases are made. Okay. But what's important is that what they are doing should be commended and they should be supported. Those people who are there in those local areas, yes, you have at the state level, but because I'm a development person, I've been involved in a lot of evaluation of, jobs at the UN level. Okay, I'm involved right now with one that's, has an international development expert. So I know things that I don't speak out of context. I'm speaking from my experience. I was lead consultant when they were developing the single register or evaluating, the YESO program in Kogi. So I've been in the field. I am there. And I appreciate that we have gaps at that level. So 3 things I'm closing with is 1, there has to be subsidy. 2, there has to be some relationship that now creates a huge volume. 3, our research institutes must be involved in this. 4, our funding institutions must be involved in this. Then you can begin to now take these youths, okay, that you're talking about, that are in the bush carrying guns and carrying knives and doing drugs. And for crying out aloud, how many mental health hospitals do we have in Nigeria? Most of those youths you see there have gone crazy. And I keep mentioning mental health because you see people are getting more disrespectful, people are getting more uninterested in life.
Dr.
Right.
Okengo,
Let's,
we have less than 2 more minutes.
Yes, I'd like to ask Dr. Ayo quickly in 60 seconds.
So that we can just have the last.
What would be your advice, or what do you think government can do at this moment, to mitigate the impact?
Okay, thank you very much. In economics, the solution to inflation is a function of the cause of the inflation. We should look at the causes of inflation in Nigeria, not just adopting policy randomly. The cause of inflation in Nigeria, in my own evaluation, is cost of production. And when you say cost of production, supply side factors. We are talking about how to solve middle. You don't dialogue with middlemen. Boost supply. When you boost supply, you don't need middlemen again. Middlemen take advantage of inadequate supply. So when government boosts supply through many strategies, reduce interest rates, encourage production, give subsidy to farmers, subsidize their input, supply will outrage demand.
Thank you. Dr. Akinshiju.
Yes.
Your 30 seconds.
Commodity exchange rather than marketing board.
I thank you. I thank you. We actually, I think that was a bonus for you, Dr. Lee Akinshiju from Demola. Dr. Akinshiju is chairman, Independent Media and Policy Initiative. He's also a financial expert. We also spoke with Dr. Meka Okengwu, who is a development economist and a farmer. Of course, Dr. Professor Mariam Abdu joined us from our Kaduna studio, and she is a professor of finance. Thank you very much, Prof, for joining us. And of course, I have not forgotten Dr. Ayo Anthony, Head Prices Division, National Bureau of Statistics. Thank you very much for joining us. And that's it. Good morning, Nigeria, for today. I thank you for watching. I'll see you next week, but Demola will be here tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. See you tomorrow.